All right, so I'm going to actually introduce our speaker today. Sallie is a principal scientist at Illinois State Geological Survey, University of Illinois, and the PI for the Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium. Sallie is also the co-PI for the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative, a new CO2 regional deployment initiative focused on CCUS deployment in the Midwest and Northeast United States. In these roles, Sallie leads a team of scientists, engineers, and policymakers working on several carbon capture and geologic storage projects, including the one in Illinois Basin and many more. Over the last 20 years, she has consulted or contributed to more than 30 energy and CCS projects, especially in the areas of project development, risk reduction, and stakeholder engagement. Sallie holds a PhD in secondary and continuing education major and a Master of Science degree in geology from University of Illinois and a Bachelor of Art degree in geology from Alfred University in New York. With that, I would like to turn it to Sallie to start the presentation. I think you are muted, Sallie. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm very, very pleased to be here today. I will share my screen with you and go ahead and get started on the presentation and look forward to hearing people's questions at the end. So let me just, sorry. Why is this? There we go. I am pleased to present work that has been done at the Illinois State Geological Survey for the last 20 years. We've been very fortunate to be funded and involved in programs by the US Department of Energy. And I put this graphic here just to give you a sense of how long and how much work has been done in the United States over the past decades, where the carbon capture and storage program was started in the late 1990s. And then the work that I will be talking to you about primarily today happens in the 2003 to present timeframe based on the regional carbon sequestration partnerships. But I also would like to highlight that there are new regional initiatives that are happening and programs such as the CarbonSAFE program, and I'll talk a little bit about those. But what I hope you'll gain from my presentation today is a sense of how much involvement we've had in Illinois along this curve and how much a contribution we're making to the area of carbon capture and storage, especially with respect to industrial storage of CO2 from biofuels. I've been in this space a very long time. I have worked on CCS or CCUS since about 2003. And what's very interesting for me and what I hope you'll gain a sense of again today is that we're really starting to see now for all of our efforts come to fruition and that the pieces are coming together. But there are many pieces. There's technical pieces, social pieces, legal and policy and regulatory pieces. And my talk hits a little bit on all of those to give you a flavor of how carbon capture and storage is happening in the United States and all of the things that really go into having a successful project. I mentioned the regional carbon sequestration partnerships. The map on the left of the United States is the original 7 partnerships. And I am the lead for the smallest of them, the Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium, and the projects that I'll be talking about today are based in the MGSC. But recently, within about 2 years ago, the Department of Energy took those 7 partnerships and consolidated us into 4. And so now I am co-leading the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative with our other Midwestern partners. So what we've done is basically increased the scope and the potential for exploration of CCUS potential across the United States. And one last thing about the partnerships is what we've really been designed to do is to build capacity, do demonstration projects, scale up demonstration projects from very small to over 1 million tons, but then also within our different regions of the United States, focus on specific geology, specific basins, and work with our business and industrial stakeholders, as well as regulators and the public, that are very specific to these different regions. Because just like in different countries, smaller countries than the United States, there's different cultures, there's different business agreements. And so really approaching CCUS from a smaller and more manageable perspective has been one of the goals and objectives, which I believe we've been very successful in. So bringing it down a little bit from the national scale to the state scale in Illinois, we also have our own trajectory, and of which I am very proud, and very proud to be a part of such a successful team. So we started our work, our large scale work, with the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, which was a 1 million ton carbon capture and storage project that I will be talking about in detail in just a minute. That project was expanded and accelerated using the research that we did from the first project to a near commercial scale project led by an industrial partner. And those projects are, for the most part, co-located. We also are a participant and a leader in a more recent research program funded by the Department of Energy, which has been happening in phases. That's how the US federal government likes to do projects. So phase 1 of the CarbonSAFE program were pre-feasibility studies. Phase 2, which you see moving up the arrow, are feasibility studies. And then phase 3, this was just awarded, is looking at establishing a site, conducting the necessary permit to be able to build a carbon capture and storage site. So I should say the objective of the CarbonSAFE program is to characterize a storage complex that could accept on the order of 50 million tons of carbon dioxide over a period of a couple of decades. This is a map of the central portion of the United States. On the left here, you see the outline of the Illinois Basin. That's the subsurface geologic feature that I'll be focusing on today. And then you can see sort of to the bottom, to the southeast, what the overall geophysics framework is, where the major faults are in the area. And then zeroing in on this square here in the middle is the city of Decatur, Illinois, which is where the projects are that I want to be talking with you about. But you can also see on the right-hand side of the screen where we have sources and sinks of CO2 or for CO2 in the region, and where we are primarily focusing. So with that, I also want to just highlight one of the advantages of having been involved in CCUS for as long as I have, is that I've listened to, as we learn more and we build more capacity, I've listened and observed the change in language that we talk about. So when I first entered this space, we used to talk a lot about technical and non-technical barriers. What were the things that were going to stop us from being able to do carbon capture and storage? And then as we progressed in time, we realized that we knew a lot more, and but we were encountering obstacles such as delays in permitting, or changes in leadership, or lost circulation zones in drilling, that sort of thing. And so we moved from obstacles to challenges and met those challenges as we went along. And then we're able finally in around the 2015 timeframe to recognize our successes, and then use those successes, leverage them towards commercial deployment, which is where I see us at right now. So to get a little bit into the technical details of things, and I'm going to talk just a little bit about each one of those puzzle pieces. I'll spend the majority of my time talking about the technical aspects, but a little bit about the others. So the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, which is our first project, is designed to be a 1 million ton carbon storage project for an injection period of 3 years. We injected CO2 at a rate of 1,000 tons per day, built a compression dehydration facility that had a capacity of 1,100 tons per day. And then it was focused, we were really focused on geologic and social site characterization, reservoir modeling, establishing risk assessment procedures, developing a monitoring, verification, and accounting program for both the deep subsurface and the near subsurface, and also engineering design of surface infrastructure and stakeholder engagement. That project has, I'll go into this a little bit more in the next slide, but we injected for a period of 3 years. We had a pre-injection monitoring period of about 5 years, and we will have had, by the time we're done, a post-injection monitoring period of also about 5 years. And that project is slated to end next April in 2021, even though it says 2020 on my slides. And then, oh, sorry about that. And then also we are in the process right now of really nailing down our science and making sure that we have the best publications and information available that relate to what we have observed in the course of this project. The scale up project, that was the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, was essentially the science and the extensive characterization, which allowed us to scale up to an industrial scale project, which is located. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go back and forth a little bit between U.S. units and metric units, so forgive me for that. The two injection wells on these projects are about 1 mile apart. That project is currently still injecting, and we have, between the two projects, injected almost about 3 million tons of CO2 at this point. The injection rate for the Industrial Sources Project is higher. Is about 3,000 tons per day. That's the availability or the capacity for the well. There's been a reduction in ethanol production in the United States, which means that the amount of CO2 that is available for the project to store is lower than they had originally anticipated. So volumes are lower, although the reservoir could certainly take that carbon dioxide. Both of these projects have the only active Class 6 underground injection control permit. That's the type of permit you have to have in the United States to be able to do saline storage, nothing associated with enhanced oil recovery. And that's regulated by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So this is an aerial view of the first project, the Illinois Basin Decatur Project. You see here in the green box, that's what we call the site. It's an 800-meter square location, which is located at Archer Daniels Midland Industrial Complex in Decatur, Illinois. Archer Daniels Midland is a corn and soybean processing company. They're a food science company that produces everything from ethanol to lysine and a lot of other products that are used in the food industry. So we are capturing down here at the bottom, the blue box is a compression dehydration facility, which is attached to the Decatur, or I'm sorry, to the ADM corn processing plant, where they are fermenting corn to make ethanol, which we use as a fuel additive in the United States. So our gasoline is somewhere from 8 to 10% ethanol. And what we're doing is capturing that CO2 as it comes off of the ethanol fermenter. We run it through a compression dehydration facility. It's a 4-stage compression dehydration facility, which removes water and compresses the carbon dioxide from essentially atmospheric pressure to 1400 PSI at the wellhead. So this blue line is a pipeline. It's about 2 kilometers long that goes to the red dot, which is the injection well. And then to the north at the pink dot is the deep monitoring well, which is drilled to the same depth. So these wells are drilled to about 2,200, 2,400 meters. That's a little bit more in that range. And the injection is happening at about 2,100 meters beneath the surface. So in juxtaposition to that, you'll see to the north another box on the screen, and that has the same infrastructure. That's for the Industrial Sources Project. And you can see that it's got roughly the same configuration. It has an injection well, a deep monitoring well, and then the GM1 and 2 wells. Those are dedicated geophysical monitoring wells where we have sensors cemented in so that we can do repeat seismic. And initially we had tried to do repeat vertical seismic profiles, which was more or less successful. In addition to this project, there in the central portion of the figure, you see something called Richland Community College, which is actually a 2-year college in the United States. And they, through the second project, have developed some a 2-year semi-engineering program, which allows you to transfer to a 4-year university and learn specifically about carbon capture and storage. So a very interesting program. This next slide is an overview of our monitoring program, and you can see there's been a variety of different types of monitoring. We've done everything from deep fluid and pressure sampling in the injection and the verification wells, as well as fluid sampling and downhole, complete downhole temperature and pressure in those, sensing in those wells. We've also done a lot of near surface monitoring and some surface monitoring. So everything from soil gas to soil flux to covariance, which is essentially like a mini weather station, as well as remote sensing using P.A.S.S. INSAR to see whether or not there was any sort of ground uplift as a function of the CO2 injection. And the spoiler alert, there was none, but we did want to test that. One of the things, the takeaway points I'd like you to notice from this slide is the difference in density in the monitoring programs from the Illinois Basin Decatur Project to the second Industrial Sources Project. And what you're seeing there is that we as a research program for the first project tried every monitoring technology and technique that we could think of that we wanted to deploy. And in the course of doing that, we were then able to down select the types of monitoring that we felt were most effective, that gave us the best information, but also to change the frequency with which we were sampling. So for example, in the early part of the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, we were monitoring soil gas and soil flux on and groundwater, shallow groundwater wells on sometimes a weekly basis. And now we're monitoring those, sampling those on in many cases on a quarterly basis. But having established the environmental baseline to understand the regional systems and what the composition, CO2 and other chemical composition of the subsurface, what the seasonal variations are, all sorts of things have allowed us to then create a monitoring program that is more scaled to what we would anticipate in an industrial application of and long-term application of CCUS. So this gives you a look at one of the well logs from the monitoring well. And also, I haven't mentioned it yet, but the reservoir unit that we're talking about that we're storing CO2 in at Decatur is called the Mount Simon Sandstone. It's about 500 meters thick, and about at the top of the Mount Simon is about 15 or 1700 meters beneath the surface. That's directly overlain by the primary seal, which is called the Eau Claire Shale, and that is about 150 meters thick at that location. So what you can see on this log is that the Illinois Basin Decatur Project injection zone is at the base of the Mount Simon, almost directly interfacing with the Precambrian basement beneath it. And then the Industrial Sources Project is injecting about 50 or 60 meters higher in the Mount Simon sandstone. And there's some good reasons for that. I'll talk a little bit more about in detail going forward, but one of the outcomes of the Illinois Basin Decatur Project is that we have had some significant results, or we've seen some significant microseismic activity as a function of the injection, and that it is taking place near to the Precambrian basement. And so as a result of that, as well as other decisions, the decision was made for the Industrial Sources Project to inject higher up in the section to determine whether or not we would see a decrease in the amount of microseismic activity. We have done repeat 3D seismic, so we have a 4D seismic volume. We've also taken the opportunity to do some significant due diligence in the last couple of years to reprocess some of our data to try and improve the resolution and gain greater understanding for not only our models, but again, specifically for this observed microseismic activity. So you see on the left our previous seismic reflection, and then on the right, a sample of the reprocess, which definitely gives you a better sense of resolution, where you can start to see faults resolved in the subsurface. What I'm showing here is a porosity inversion. And this line across the bottom is essentially the dividing line between everything below that is either a Precambrian wash, a unit that is not exactly Precambrian, but is made of diagenetically altered Precambrian, and then the Precambrian subsurface beneath that, you'll see that there's a structure here which influences the movement of CO2 in the subsurface, and we think is related to some degree to the microseismic activity. And then the blue area here you see here is the injection, is the high porosity injection zone in which the Illinois Basin Decatur Project is injecting. I'm showing here a history match to give you a sense. What you see on the left side in blue are the pressure data for the Illinois Basin Decatur Project. You see a fallow line in the middle, which is a period of no injection, and then the pink on the right is for the Industrial Sources Project. So we've been working to refine our models and both our static model and our reservoir models to make sure that we can match the history and extrapolate reservoir conditions. This gives you a sense of plume distribution in the area. The larger plume is currently the Illinois Basin Decatur Project, because we have our full 1 million tons of CO2 in the subsurface. Then a little bit higher up in the Mount Simon, you see the plume. This is a couple of years old now, this figure, but you see the Industrial Sources plume. And initially, when these two projects were funded and designed, it was our hope that we would be able to be injecting CO2 simultaneously in the two projects, but due to some permitting delays and other factors, that did not really come about. But having these two plumes in close juxtaposition to each other is allowing us to model what we might see were we to do larger projects with more than one injection well in the area. This is that same plume distribution, just giving you an aerial perspective of where those plumes are. And it's important to say, for the purposes of the United States, that these two plumes both completely underlie Archer Daniels Midland property. And I will talk a little bit about property rights and pore space ownership later in the presentation. I also wanted to show you some of the microseismic activity. What you see here in the blue dots are microseismic events that occurred during the injection of the Illinois Basin Decatur Project. These microseismic events formed in clusters, and the clusters were active at various times as the injection went forward. The first event was noted in February of 2012. I don't think I said it yet, but injection at the Illinois Basin Decatur Project started in November of 2011 and concluded in November of 2014. We had initially hoped that the microseismic activity might be a way to do a kind of a proxy plume development, that they would correlate, but that is not the case. Microseismic events trigger off in different clusters at different times, and there's not really an identifiable temporal or time component. Moving to the interim injection period, where there's no injection, we still saw microseismic events occurring, and there was a slight increase in microseismicity when we stopped injection, but then it has subsided to basically to a background level. And then we see at the start of, or as the second project, the Industrial Sources Project, has undertaken its larger volumes of CO2, there are some microseismic activities, but not nearly to the extent as what we saw with the first project. And then just to give you a sense of what's happening geologically, the majority of those microseismic events are happening below the sandstone into the Precambrian basement. So below the Mount Simon sandstone in the Precambrian. And then also, they are correlating roughly with structure, and that's what I showed you in that porosity inversion. We have some Precambrian highs in the Illinois Basin around which, or on top of which, our sedimentary rocks have been deposited. So some of the major accomplishments for the Illinois Basin Decatur Project: we successfully completed a large-scale storage demonstration at a very active industrial site. We had a state injection permit, which was transferred to a federal permit. We've done an extensive amount of stakeholder engagement and built trusted relationships. We've met and exceeded all of the technical and non-technical challenges, which were many, and done extensive characterization and modeling, which lead us to the understanding of the microseismic reservoir response, and also the history matching of what's happening in the reservoir. And we've also engaged in, and what I'm doing today is an example of this, pretty extensive regional, national, and international partnership and collaboration and knowledge sharing. So very happy to be able to do that. I like to think in numbers, and this is, in fact, a picture of me jokingly trying to lift a surface drill bit when we were drilling the first well. We've stored 3 million tons of CO2 between the two projects from biofuel production. We've drilled more than 5,000 meters of well, taken 250 or more meters of core, done tens of thousands of groundwater analyses, utilized 1 million plus hours of supercomputing resources to do basin scale modeling. We've welcomed visitors from, this is actually more like 32 countries, and probably 1,000 to 1,500. And we've had the pleasure of working with more than 100 people from 10 or more organizations. So it's really been a collective effort that has gotten us where we are today. Some of the things that we've learned, some of our lessons, is that geology is critical, and it's always going to be a factor when you're doing carbon capture and storage. you know, and geologists and engineers really have to work together to understand what that means. Iterative scientific investigation is important and has been important in the scale up in both the United States and in Illinois. We believe very firmly that it's critical to have baseline environmental condition understanding before you start injecting CO2, so that your deep subsurface and near subsurface monitoring results can be compared against something. We had a lot of unanticipated things happen, and those provide insights and have allowed us to improve from the first project to the second project. For example, we hit a lost circulation zone in the drilling of the first set of wells, and then anticipated that in the second project, and were able to not have any delays in drilling, not incur any extra costs, because we already had a plan in place for what that what our response would be should we hit that zone. Simple always applies. Occam's razor is a principle. If you're not familiar with the simplest solution is usually the best solution. We've had some very complicated completions for some of our monitoring wells, which we've had to recomplete and change. And so doing so, we recognize that really in the course of being engaged and active researchers, perhaps we made things a little bit more complicated than they really need to be. Moving along, I want to talk not too much about policy, but I'd like to just mention that there's a tax credit that's available right now in the United States. There's some guidance that has just come out about this from the Internal Revenue Service about how to actually go about claiming the project and the tax credits. And basically for saline storage, you're looking at the potential of a tax credit of $50 per ton of CO2 stored, and enhanced oil recovery on the order of $35 per ton for CO2 stored. You have to begin construction. This is the current thinking right now, or the current date right now, by December 31st of 2023. Given the pandemic situation that we're in now and some uncertainties, that date may change, but so far it has not. Credits are transferable. So right now the tax credit goes to the entity that has built who owns the capture equipment, but it can be transferred anywhere across the value chain. And then projects will have to certify safe and secure storage. And we've just gotten guidance on what that means. Moving on a little bit to the legal aspects of things. In the United States, and I think that this is different depending on what country you're in, the pore space ownership goes to, again, in the United States, whoever owns the surface owns the subsurface beneath their property. Mineral rights, so if I had oil or coal underneath my home, I could sever those rights and I could sell them to somebody else for them to produce. So there's differences in the United States between onshore and offshore pore space. The federal government, unless it's federal land, like some of our national parks and other things, does not own the pore space. The surface owner typically owns to the center of the earth. And what has happened, that there's been a variety of models in the way that projects have worked with surface owners in order to be able to store CO2 beneath their property. So at ADM, which I was just talking about, they own the surface, so they accepted the ownership of the stored CO2 and the liability associated with that. Other projects that we've seen have leased or optioned for a certain price per ton or area of CO2 storage in a reservoir. And then we've also seen some unanticipated, unexpected consequences as states are changing their laws. And again, another thing in the United States is every state has its own legal rules, and they have to relate to the federal rules, but they can be handled differently. So that also makes it kind of complicated. With respect to the regulatory framework, it's also very complicated. There's a program called the Underground Injection Control Program. They regulate they regulate anything injected into the subsurface. And because under something called the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, you cannot inject anything into the subsurface that could potentially could impact current or future drinking water. And so everything is regulated under this program. Different states and different regions have primacy or control, administrative control over different classes. There are different classes of wells. And then there are, and then sometimes the federal government has primacy, sometimes state governments have primacy, so it can be very complicated. The different types of classes are: class 1 is for the deep storage of industrial, either hazardous or non-hazardous waste. Class 2 are related to oil and gas wells. Class 3 are related to saline solutions, saline mining. Class 4 exist, but you can't get one. They are for the underground storage of shallow hazardous wells, waste wells, but you can't use one of those. Class 5 is experimental wells, and then class 6 which was developed. The last of these regulations to be developed was developed in 2010, is specifically for the storage of carbon dioxide. And there are only 2 states in the United States that so far are on the path to being in control, administrative control for those carbon storage activities. North Dakota is one of them. They have primacy, and Wyoming has a pending application with the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, which is out for public comment right now, and we anticipate that they will probably have primacy by the end of the year. This just gives you a sense of what some of the specifics are around the underground injection control program. You will have this recording in these slides, so I won't go into the details. I'm going to move through the next of the slides. The permitting has been a rate limiting step for the Illinois Basin Decatur Project and for the Industrial Sources Project. There is a big effort in the United States to accelerate the amount of time that it takes to get a permit, because it's impacting project. It could have the impact of projects not being able to get the tax credit if it's delayed too long. And so improving the ability and the number of people that can process Class 6 permits is becoming an important path forward for CCUS in the United States. Another aspect of all of this, which is near and dear to my heart, and I spend a lot of time doing and thinking about, is what happens in the social or public engagement space. And a lot of, from my perspective, there's kind of 3 spheres in which this happens. There are stakeholder engagement that happens specifically around projects, and then there's engagement that happens at high policy level and this kind of opportunity that we're sharing today, but also with regulators, and is happening at the governmental level. And then there's the general public, and whether or not the general public knows or understands what CCUS is and what role it might play in our energy future. And so understanding and operating in all of these spheres is critical to moving forward with commercial deployment of CCUS. I would argue that to date, we really have done the majority of our engagement at the local project level and at the policy level. And we really need to bring that together to be able to move into the public sphere. Something that I think is very, very important also, and I'm excited to bring to your attention today, is the fact that I feel like we need to change the conversation. We are really, really good at having technical and non-technical discussions about CCUS and the deployment of CCUS amongst ourselves. And so I was super happy to see that there's some students on the session today, but also it's important to start recognizing that we have to be talking to groups that we normally don't interact with. We need to be able to find middle ground when it comes to energy and the environment, and also understand and speak to each other and from different perspectives, which is a big challenge. I will say, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that we have with CCS. And I think especially as an outcome of the COVID pandemic, we're gonna see that there's gonna be demands for significant amounts of carbon management and low carbon energy. And I suspect we're looking at a very different energy landscape moving forward. I want to just briefly, as I just have a couple of more slides, talk a little bit about what's now happening, what's going to be happening in the future. This is that regional initiative, partnership initiative map. Again, you'll see in the orange triangles, the CarbonSAFE Phase 3 projects, which have just been awarded. There's one in North Dakota, one in Wyoming, one in Illinois, one in Missouri, Alabama area in the United States, and then also one in New Mexico. What you see with the green triangles are carbon capture feed study Phase 1 and Phase 2 projects that are happening, also funded by the Department of Energy. And so that is all moving us forward towards greater volumes of captured and stored CO2, which is obviously the objective. The Midwest Regional Initiative is leveraging the work that we've done in the past. We hope to have multiple projects in the area, do additional and larger scale characterization, and really to deploy, work with states and industry and other organizations to widely deploy CCUS in the United States. Some of you may or may not be familiar with the geology of the United States, and so our best area potential for storage is kind of in this part. The northeastern part of the United States is igneous and metamorphic rocks, so not suitable for carbon storage. So looking at what that means in terms of perhaps infrastructure development, transportation of CO2, movement of CO2 from sources. And then this is, our focus is on addressing key challenges, obtaining and sharing data to support CCUS throughout the region, facilitating regional infrastructure, and then working to change that conversation and perform regional technology transfer, but also to work with the Department of Energy and the other regional partnership initiatives to continue the work that we've been doing together for the last 20 years. So with that, I would like to acknowledge the funding from the Department of Energy. The Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium is led by the Geological Surveys of Illinois, Indiana, and Kentucky. The CarbonSAFE projects are also funded from the U.S. Department of Energy through the National Energy Technology Laboratory. And then the Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative is a collaboration between the University of Illinois, where I am, the Illinois State Geological Survey, and Battelle, which is a major organization throughout the United States. And with that, here is my contact information should anybody want to contact me, and also contact information for Petrolern. So thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to speak with all of you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for the presentation, Sally. It was very nice and informative. Now we can go ahead and get some questions from participants. First, let's see if anyone wants to ask you directly. If not, I got a couple of questions in the chat section that I can read through for you to answer. Anyone has any question that wants to ask directly? Alan, do you want to go? All right, so maybe, okay, yeah, Alan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sallie, that was a great talk, and a lot's been accomplished, and you represented it really well. In these types of cases, you probably had a long wish list of things that you wanted to, data that you wanted to acquire, and so on. Are there still things on your wish list? If you could go back or continue to make measurements or models, are there things that you would like to see run here that haven't been run so far?
So that's a great question. Thank you, Alan. And we did have a very long wish list. Fortunately for us, we had some opportunities to expand the time frame of the project. So initially, it was anticipated that we would end in the end of 2017. But because of the permitting process with the federal Environmental Protection Agency, the permits for the Illinois Basin Decatur Project and the permit for the Industrial Sources Project got blended together. And our infrastructure from the first project is used as part of the monitoring system for the second project. So that allowed us to expand basically an additional 4 years of monitoring, which has been fantastic in terms of collecting data, gave us the opportunity to monitor the microseismic activity and make some interpretation, but also the time to really go back into our geologic model and our reservoir models to make sure that we are very comfortable with the reservoir representation and the reprocessing of the seismic. So I think if you had asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said, I'm not 100% satisfied with the seismic. I'm not 100% satisfied with the microseismic interpretations, but we've really had the time to go back in and do those things. So I think that's been really fantastic. The other thing is that we did do a recompletion of the completion for the Illinois Basin Decatur Project deep monitoring well was very complicated. It used a West Bay system, which was installed by Schlumberger. It had 11 fluid sampling zones. It had pressure and temperature down the entire well, but also had pressure zones at each of those fluid sampling zones. And we did this very complicated sampling process. And so in 2015, when we knew the project was going to go for another 6 years, or 4 to 6 years at that point, we recompleted that well because it just wasn't designed to be able to monitor for the duration that we needed it for and that the ADM needed it for the second project. So I feel like we got to do a lot of those things, but we're scientists, right? So we can always find more. And I think we're working very hard right now to make sure that we have an official data set that can be made available through the Department of Energy to other researchers once we're done. So a lot of data management, data compilation is happening right now to sort of dot the I's and cross the T's so that when we're finished, then that's available and easily accessible for others.
Thanks. I'll let others ask questions and I'll back off here, but my final, just very fast question is, were the wells instrumented with fiber optic?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so we got also one question on the same line. In your opinion, what is the biggest challenge in commercializing CCS technology into a profitable industry?
That's a good question also. Thank you very much. I'm going to answer from a US perspective. I think that the permitting is a challenge. I think the technology is there and industry is, like public-private partnerships, industry and government are ready to step forward and to move forward. I think there needs to be more policy drivers and incentives for doing so. And then I don't like to throw the public under the bus. I think it's very easy to say public acceptance is a major barrier, or we're never going to be able to do this because of the public. And I refuse to believe that that's true. I think we have an opportunity here to engage and change that narrative, that conversation. But I think it is very difficult, especially in the United States, where we have very partisan politics and perspectives. And I think we're starting to see a difference between in generations as well. So I would say another challenge is talking across generations and really working together to try and come up with a path forward that we can all agree serves society as well as our energy and our environmental goals. So no small ask in that, but I think that that's very critical to being able to move forward.
Fair enough, thank you. The next question is technical, asking, you showed a slide with CO2 plume visualization. How did you validate the plume location?
So that is validated history matching from the model, and then also observation from repeat logging and extrapolation. So basically we're relying heavily on our models. There's no direct plume monitoring beyond the monitoring wells that already exist. And so we know the dates at which that CO2 appeared at those wells, and the rest of it is based on our geologic and reservoir modeling.
I see. And the next question, if we co-render the microseismic and seismic together, so to see if there are, can we do that to see if there are basement faults associated with the micro earthquakes?
So again, that relies a lot on understanding the geology, on modeling the geology, and then looking at the location and the occurrence of microseismic activity. And so we have done that. I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it anyways. I am not a geophysicist, but I work with some very excellent geophysicists and geologists and structural geologists. And so you have to be very careful to not influence your interpretation of the subsurface. You could easily take a model and project your microseismic activities on that, and then convince yourself that there are faults associated with them, especially if the quality of the seismic is not as high resolution as you would hope for. So you need to be very careful not to influence your interpretation by looking at the location of the microseismic activity too soon. And so I think it's kind of an iterative process. What does your geologic model look like? Where are your microseismic events? What more can we learn about? And we're doing a lot of work with internally, and then with some colleagues in Norway at NORSAR and at SINTEF to look at the timing of events, the temporal development, how each cluster develops, what that means for the mechanical interpretation of the geomechanics interpretation of the reservoir. So all of that has to come into play. It's at this point in time, it is not a simple process. I think there's significant research, excuse me, that will happen in the next few years related to machine learning and trying to adapt machine learning processes to the use of the kind of data that we've collected at the Illinois Basin Decatur Project.
Thank you. I think we got time for one more question, and this is, has there been a significant reduction in microseismicity in the scale-up project region by injecting at a higher interval in the sands over the basement rock?
Yes. The short answer is yes. Yes, there has. And that if you look at, when you look back, if you look back at this presentation, you'll notice that there's relatively few events from the scale-up project than from the first project. So yes, indeed, being further away or higher up in the section from the Precambrian basement is definitely an important component of that second project.
Thank you so much, Sallie, again, for this nice presentation, answering our questions. I think we are out of time. And so please follow us on LinkedIn to receive updates about the next P.A.S.S talks. And with that, let's go and enjoy our own Friday. Bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.